behalf of the Koniaz family, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you today and thank you for being here and sharing in this special moment as we celebrate the life of Wayne Koniaz. And although today may be a very difficult day, we can all be comforted by the words we find in 2 Corinthians that says, "So we are always of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord, for we walk by faith and not by sight." Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. And although today we may be saddened by Wayne's departure from this world, there is no greater joy for him as a believer in Jesus Christ than to be in the presence of the one who loves him like no one else can.
Yeah, we were married for 57 years, but we dated for 3 years prior to that. And oh, it's still I can hear it now. I need to hear it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. But yeah, and we had a hard time when we were going together because we did talk about getting married, and but he wanted to live in Canada, and I wanted to live in the United States. So I said, well, we can't live on the border. We got to pick a side. Yeah. Well, actually, after we got married, we did move to Winnipeg for about 10 months, and I was good for about 2 weeks. Then I cried every night to go home. I didn't do well in the snow, but yeah, he grew up going to the lake every summer. That was his family, and they gathered on weekends there, and especially on the weekends, but and holidays, of course. But with Wayne, he worked there every summer. They had like a cabin just for the boys. I forget what they call those, but anyway, they did the work. I know they used to deliver propane because in the early years, his grandparents and his aunt and uncle, they took in guests, and they really had like 12 rooms, so they didn't have a lot of rooms. But I found a brochure that said that it was like $4 a day for one, and I think it was $10 for two people. Anyway, it looks so cheap now. But Wayne ran the boat taxi because to start with, you couldn't drive to the lake. And for many years, his family at the end were the only ones that lived there all year. And I know we thought when they were ready to sell it many years later, I thought, oh, I can't live there all by myself. Not way out in the middle of nowhere like that. But that changed when they, because to start with, everybody traveled by train. And there originally was what do you call it? The post. The building.
Post office.
What is it?
Post office.
Train station.
Train station.
Sorry.
Post.
Alzheimer's setting in. Anyway, there was a train station there, and most of the people traveled by train, and a lot of them lived on, and all these lake communities were created by people that traveled and worked on the train. That was eventually torn down, but the inn remained. And after they didn't, I should say, when Wayne was working there on summers, he drove the boat taxi, but they also delivered blocks of ice. And his family would go and cut the ice out of the lake during the winter, and they actually had an ice house. I was quite impressed with an ice house. But yeah, they delivered that, gas, all kinds of stuff. I remember that they had a closet with just samples of liquor, and they would sell it. People would see, well, yeah, I want this kind, and then the boys would have to go down in the basement and get what they ordered. But they would empty a train cargo ship every week, and I thought, oh my God, Canadians are all alcoholics. And I thought, well, this is going to be hard. But no, as it turned out, their tax was cheaper where they were at, and people came from all the area for it, and some of them even drove an airplane. I remember an airplane came in one time, and that was quite impressive. But Wayne just loved to work, and I know at the lake, I missed this part, that they would have a regatta, and that's when Wayne would do the tug of war and horseshoes, and they even had, for the babies, they even had a little race for babies to get stuff, so all the kids, everybody got something. at the regatta. But I know at one time the inn had their own dance hall when they were taking guests in. And Wayne was a good dancer. His Uncle Art taught him how to dance. But living in Canada, hockey is the primary thing. Here it's football, but hockey was the thing. And here in Arizona and California, people, kids would play in your neighborhood park. You play in your neighborhood, but there, especially when he lived in Grand Prairie, that was his early teens. The parents would go out and make an ice rink for him. So they'd skated all the time, and I remember him telling me that they would catch a car driving down the road and catch the bumper and skate behind it. I thought, oh yeah, that's safe. Reminds me of our son district. Yeah, he liked that kind of stuff too. Wayne's parents moved to California when he was 17, and you see him in that kilt and everything. He was a drummer in the school band, so the marching band. So I didn't know him then. I met him when he was 18, and he had that red sports car. And I guess I was supposed to be impressed, but I don't know cars, so it was just a car. But when he almost drove off the Dead Man's Curve, then he got the 57 Chevy. And he's the only person I know that ever had an upside down record player in his car. So in truth, Wayne and I always spend a lot of time just cruising. We get a good stereo system in the car, and he'd drive, and I know in high school sometimes I'd be doing my homework while he's driving around and listening to tunes. But it was fun. He was fun, and he always had a sense of adventure. I can remember when he was doing the mortgage servicing, which Bob Crisino got him the job there in California, and then they transferred him to San Diego. We were there for 2 years, and then he transferred over here to Phoenix. And he grew the business so bad they didn't want to manage it. So we ended up, that's when we bought the interest in Arizona. And he started out, it was just him on a desk in Joey's room, because he was tiny. And I thought, well, I learned early that if I wanted to see Wayne, I had to go where he was working. I would, when he was in retail, he'd have a clerk go over and take Summer over to the toys, and I would help Wayne work. And I'm thinking, I'm helping. So when we had the mortgage servicing business, I thought, he'd work all day, then he'd come home and make phone calls when people weren't there, he'd leave a tag. I thought, well, if I do that, he'll have more time for me. No, that didn't happen. He just kept growing the business. First it was 3 states, then it was 6 states, then it was 23 states, then it was all 50 states plus Puerto Rico, And just before he turned 40, I remember him coming home, and the doctors told him, well, if I don't change my ways and start eating right and exercising, then I won't see 40. And I thought, oh my God, we just expanded and I got young kids. You can't do that to me. Yeah, but he didn't do anything, and of course he survived. He didn't die. So, he thought he was invincible. I think most guys think they're invincible. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, and one of the things I wanted to point out too is that when he lived in Grand Prairie, he was on a hockey team. He was definitely a joiner. And he even performed in the Ice Capades there. And he said he joined it because it was mostly girls. No competition, But when we were in the mortgage servicing business, some days he'd come home and he'd say, okay, pack up, we're gonna go to Utah or wherever. Because, he drove he put like 75,000 miles on our cars a year for a long time. We went through a lot of cars. But he'd come home and say, okay, pack up. So I make a bed in the back of the car and throw the kids in, and I learned I could pack the whole family in an hour. So we could be on the road as soon as he said, oh, let's go. So that was fun. And we were always going somewhere. I really missed that when he started getting sick, we couldn't go anywhere for a while. But let's see what else. Yeah, I think his sense of adventure and the fact that he just loved people was really what kept me going in life. No matter what happened, there was always some place we could go and something we could do. So I enjoyed that. But you know, he was a people person, and when he met people, he made a friend. And when you were his friend, he never forgot you. And I know on Sunday afternoons after church, we'd go home and he'd call his cousin Bonnie, who's more like a sister to him than his own sister was. He'd talk to her about an hour, and then he'd just get his phone book, his address book out, and he'd start calling friends just to see how they were doing. He really cared how they were doing. And I know with our kids, you know, he would ask me every day, if he didn't talk to them on the phone, then he'd say, well, what do you know? Did they call you? Have you talked to them? How are they doing today? I thought, well, you know, they have a life too. You know, they don't necessarily want to talk to us all the time. But I know that he worked with the missions group at one church, Desert Breeze, and he loved working on the Navajo reservation, and they would go to Mexico too. He just loved working with kids, and I think he became a chaplain then. He was a chaplain for a while. Pardon me. I wanted to share a time when we lived in Coquitlam, which was a suburb of Vancouver, that our son Destry was in community football. Well, our entire family was one was James was the coach, Wayne was the equipment manager, Summer was the cheerleader, taught the cheerleaders, and I worked with the manager. But the entire family was involved in his sport. I don't know if he liked it or not. He never complained. But anyway, I know you don't like a lot of attention, Destry, but I had to tell him that. Let's see if there's anything else I forgot. Oh, I mean, one of the jobs that he had I thought was so interesting is he worked as a reporter for Lundberg Survey, and he would drive. He had the whole west side of the valley and part of the east side of the valley, and he would drive around just writing down the prices, gas prices, and that's what they report on TV to say the average price of gas is this. It was people like Wayne, and one time he couldn't do it, and so I got it all divided up because he would get this big sheet of list that he worked off. Well, I split it up between three of us. Oh Lord, it was hard. One time I called and said, we can't do it. We can't do this. You know, you'll have to wait for Wayne. And they go, but you have to. No. Can't do it. Anyway, I just wanted to share those things. I appreciate you coming. I know Wayne would not have liked all this attention brought to him, but he's the love of my life, and I just wanted to honor him. And one thing I did want to say is that some of his really close friends are here today. Bob Casino, we've been having lunch with him for years and years on a regular basis. And Don Erickson was the guy that introduced us, and he was in our wedding. And then Don Nelson lives in California. Oh, Don Erickson lives in Iowa. He flew it. And Don Nelson was the guy that always had the cool cars. You know, doesn't everybody have a friend that has the cool cars? Well, we did, yeah. Anyway, I appreciate you coming. I thank you. It means a lot to me.